Hi, and welcome to Delphi Programming. We're going to be looking at 2D arrays, two-dimensional arrays. We're going to be looking at populating a 2D array, displaying the contents of the array, finding the sum of rows, and finding the sum of columns. As you will notice, I've already set up the GUI to save time. I'm using a form, and on the form I have 4 buttons. The first one is called btn populate, button display, button that will find the sum of the rows, and the button that will find the sum of the columns. I've kept the button names on. You can change the captions a little later. The first thing we're going to do is I want you to double click on button populate, which will take us to the code for the button. And the first thing that we need to do is to declare the two-dimensional array. And we're going to declare it globally, so I'm going to my var section. The name of this program would be, or the name of the 2D array is detentions. So to declare a 2D array, we need to give it a name, detentions, and which is of type array, square brackets. The number of rows will be 4, and the number of columns would be 4, of type integer. So we're going to store the detentions in the various forms, form 2, 3, 4, 5, or grades, grade 10, 11, grade 8, 9, 10, 11, whichever grades we want to, into the two-dimensional arrays. I'm going to return to the button called button populate, and you'll notice I've declared 2 variables, r and c, which is of type integer. So the first thing we need to do when we populate a 2D array is to run 2 loops. The first loop is the r loop, which will run from 1 to the number of rows, which is 4. I'm going to take out the -1. And the second loop is going to run for C, and we're going to run it from 1 using a tab key, and to the number of columns, which is 4. Okay, to prevent the user from entering 16 values, what we're going to do is use a random function. So I'm going to call for the name of the array, which is detentions, or detentions, and we're going to give it an index r, c, which is assigned the random function. I'm going to use random 100 plus 1, which will give us a range from 0 to 100, and that should randomly generate the numbers and store them in a two-dimensional array. We're going to return to the design view. The next thing we want to do is we want to look at programming the second button, which is button display. Okay, I want you to double click on button display, and that will take us to button display. And you'll notice I've declared some variables. I've pre-declared them, r, c, which is of type integer, and I've declared one line which is of type string. I will discuss this as we go along the program. So in the first button, we've generated the numbers, and that's stored in the array. Now we need to display the 2D array. And for us to do that, we're going to follow the same convention for running a for loop, but I'm going to choose a begin and an end because I'm going to have more than one statement in the for loop. And the first loop is once again the r loop, which will run from 1 to the number of rows, and in this case 4. And then I'm going to run a c loop for control space, with a begin, and the c loop once again is going to run 1 to 4 because we have the same number of rows and columns in the matrix. And if we do that, what we want to do is output the contents of the 2D array. Now that actually creates a little bit of a problem for us. So what we're going to do now is just output the contents and see what happens in the program. So to output, I have a GUI which is called red. It's a rich edit box, and it's called red display dot lines dot add, and I'm going to use this into string for the contents of the 2D array is integer, so I need to convert it to a string before I display them. So it's into string, and the name of the array is detentions, which is not picking up, so I'm going to type its entire name in, and square brackets R, comma, C. And that should work. So we're going to run this, and if there are any errors, we'll try and debug them. You'll notice now that it runs. So if I click on button populate, it would generate the numbers. Now I'm clicking on button display, and you'll notice that I have all the numbers displayed, but we don't want them vertically. We need to display them in a form of a 2D array, in other words, in the form of a matrix. Now for us to be able to do that, what we have to do is we have to firstly concatenate or join the contents of each row and then display it. At this moment, we are using red display.lines.add, which is outputting each element to a different line. So I'm going to now take the statement out. Now we'll leave it there and we'll bring in a one line. And that's the reason why I declared one line. And I'm going to say one line is assigned one line. Now I want to declare one line to be a blank before each row starts. So I'm going to say one line is assigned a blank equal to, and when I come here I'm going to say one line assigned one line plus the contents of the array. And in this case the contents of the array, we can quickly copy it from the code I put in previously, and that will make each row one line. It will join each row and make it one line, converting it to a string. And when we go to row 2, then one line is cleared and then it will join row 2. So after each row has been concatenated, then I'm going to do my display of one line. So I'm going to take out the contents. We don't need to convert it to a string because it is a string. Now what I also want to do is I want to create a tab space between each one. So what I can do here is bring in a hashtag 9, which actually sets a tab space for us. So I'm going to say one line, and in between the plus I'm going to bring in a hashtag 9, which now creates a tab space. Now if we run that, it'll be quite interesting to see what actually happens. We have an error. That's very good. So now we need to look at this statement and look at what the error is. What I'm trying to do here, this is a string component and detention of RC is an integer. Therefore we have an incompatible type error. So what we needed to do is convert this, I'm going to put that into a bracket, into a string. And to convert that into a string is a simple command. The computer will pick it up for you. Int control space string. And now if we run it, we now have our GUI, button populate, button display. We have the contents being displayed as a 2D array, 4 rows and 4 columns. The next thing we want to do is put some headings in here. How do we add headings into this block? Okay, we want column headings. The column headings will appear on the top line. It is not part of the loop. So I just need a display statement, which is red display.lines.add, and I'm going to add the column headings, and I'm going to call them forms. Form 2, form 3, form 4, form 5. If you're not used to form, which is a British system, let's go to grade. So we're going to call them grades. Grade 8, 9, 10, and 11. So I'm going to use a hashtag 9 to create the tab space. So the first one is hashtag 9 plus, and I'm going to have form. Actually, I want to use the word grade 8 plus. Now I'm going to copy and paste. So I'm going to say copy, and then we're going to say paste. The next one would be grade, get a tab space, grade 9. And then we're going to paste again and call that grade 10. You notice that I need a plus sign in between the hashtag 9. So I'm going to go again, put my plus, say paste, and then we can change that to 11. And that should have given us column headings. If we run that, and now if I look at this, button populate, display, I have beautiful column headings, grade 8, 9, 10, and 11. Now closing that, you'll notice that the top line, please make a note that that line is for column headings. So you might want to put a note there. And remember that is actually for our column headings. The row headings are a little more challenging. For the row headings, if we return to the GUI and we run that, I want the row headings to appear before each row. There's row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4. So it means that I must go and code in the loops. So to be able to achieve that, I want the years to be displayed. That's the first thing before we output one line. So what we can do there is we can set the year to say 2013. I want to output 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, etc. So what we can do is, instead of saying one line is assigned a blank, we can now say one line is assigned the year. But remember, one line is a string, so int to string first, and we can say right into string. We want to add in 2013, but the following time we wanted to change by 1 to 2014. So we're going to use the R counter to help us. So we'll say R plus 2013, or we could say 2012, because R is 1, that'll give us 2013. So what will happen is one line is set to 2013, and that 2013 is being concatenated, joined to the contents. And if we do that, let's see what happens. So button populate, button display, you see we have beautiful row headings. And I want you to make a note that this line here is what helps us to generate the row headings. Next, we want to return to the GUI. So we've got our button populate, our button display. Now we want to do sum of rows. So I'm going to double click on sum of rows, and you can see that I've already preset R, C, and sum. So once again, for 2D arrays, to find the sum of rows, we're going to run 2 loops. Now, if you want to save time, you can always go up somewhere and copy and paste, because we have the loops running. So we could do that, or we could just start from scratch. So what I'm going to do is start generating code from scratch and say, right, 4. And I'm going to use my R. I'm going to say 1:4. Do. I should have used the 1 at the begin, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to type it begin, and I have an N. Then I'm going to use a 4. Control space with a begin. And now I'm going to say C:1:4. Actually, I'm using my tab space. So I've got 4R is assigned 1 to 4, for C is assigned 1 to 4, do begin. Now, we've done this in 1D arrays. If we want to find the sum, we said sum is assigned 0. And then we say sum is assigned sum, which is now 0, plus the contents from the array, which is in detentions of R, C. So what we're doing is, when the first row starts, we're setting the sum to 0. It will add the contents of row 1, column 1, row 1, column 2, the entire row. When we return to R becoming 2, which is row 2, the sum is cleared out. Now, we would lose each sum row if we don't store them. So for us to be able to store them, we're going to quickly return to the global section and declare a 1D array called sum rows, which is of type array, and that's running from 1 to 4 of type integer, that will store the sum of the rows. Now if we return to our code, so before we go and clear out the sum to 0, we're going to say sum of rows of R. When R is 1, it will be 1. When R is 2, so it's going to store each sum row is assigned. We're transferring the value of sum into the 1D array, and that would work. If I run that, you see we're picking up no errors, and we're not gonna display that. We haven't added this to our display. So we now need to return to our display and now think, where do we want to display the sum of the rows? Remember, it's stored in a 1D array. It should actually be at the end of each. We're going to our display, and if we look at the display, we're outputting one line, which is the entire row. Now at the end of that row, we want to put a hashtag 9, which is a tab space, and now display the sum of the rows of R. And if we do that and we run the program, we're picking up an error on this one, as you would notice, and the error is quite simple to sort out. If you read, it's an incompatible type. Once again, some rows is of type integer. We need to convert it to a string, so I'm going to say int control space to string, and hopefully that should sort our error out. I'm going to run that again. Seems to be working. Button populate, button display, and you'll notice that we have all the sum of the rows at the end, but you can see that we have an error. It's picking up at 0. We need to diagnose why is it still 0. So let's get back into the code. Okay, if we run it again, and the reason why it picked up all zeros, it's not because something is wrong. It's because I did not click on button sum rows. So before I do my display, we need to click on button sum rows, which will find the sum of the rows. Now if we click on display, we have all the totals. It will be good for us to do two things. I want to make the random range smaller so we can check if the addition is correct, and also put a heading for the sum of the rows. So we're going to close that, returning to the code. Remember, we need to go to the column headings, which is sitting right there, and now we're going to add a hashtag 9 to keep a tab space, plus now the message is going to be simple message called totals. That'll sort that problem out. I want to go back to this. I'm going to change the range to 10 so that we can just keep quick track whether our calculations is right. So if we run that again, button populates, display, sum rows, then display, we'll see we have all our totals. And quickly we can do the first one, 2, 3, 5, 10, 12. It is correct. Our next task is to find the sum of the columns. So returning to the GUI, double click on columns. Now the sum of the columns, we can use the same skeleton or the same template from sum of the rows. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste in that. And now we're going to declare an array called sum columns. So I'm going to go to the top. We've got sum rows. Once again, we're going to copy this. And we're going to paste that, and we're going to change this one because there are 4 columns as well. We can say sum columns. Run it 1 to 4. So we declared an array returning to the code for sum of columns. We're going to now change this to sum columns instead of sum rows. And the difference is we want to do a column by column addition. So we change R to C and C to R. And that should work. We're going to quickly run just to check for errors. Okay, we see we have no errors. We're not going to display because we need to now go back to display and output the sum of the columns. Now, if you actually think about the sum of the columns, we're back here. The sum of the columns will be on the last line, which is not part of the entire nested loop. So we're going to run a new loop just to output the sum of the columns. So now that the nested for loop is terminated, I'm going to use the same variable, one line, and assign it to a blank. And then I'm going to run a loop using a plus. Let's take the plus and put it equal to. Now there are 4 columns, 4 total columns. So we're going to run a for loop. R 1 to 4. And firstly, what we want to do is join each of the elements of the 1D array that has the sum of the columns. So we're going to say one line is assigned one line plus let's add a tab space in between. So we've got a tab space, and we're now going to concatenate and join that to the contents of the sum of the columns array, which is now R. And that will concatenate the sum of the columns as one string. And all we have to do now is output red display dot lines dot add, and it will be nice to give it a heading as well, and we're calling it totals plus one line. Theoretically, this should work. If it doesn't work, we'll try and pick up the error and look where we went wrong. So I'm now outputting the sum of the columns by using a loop. R is assigned 1 to 4, and it's a 1D array. So let's see if it works. So we're running that. We picked up our first error. Once again, it's an error because we didn't change the type. We need to convert that to a string. So int control space. Before I actually do that, always put a bracket or you would lose some of the code. So let's put that in brackets. And we're going to convert that to a string, into string. And that should have sorted that problem out. And now if we look at our program, we got a button populate, some of the rows, some of the columns, and a display. And you'll notice we have all being displayed except that the sum of the columns is still at 0. So we're going to try and solve. Okay, returning to the code, sum of columns. We're running a C loop, we're running an R loop. Sum is assigned sum plus the changes of R and C. And there's our error. We should have been saying C and not R, because your C loop runs from 1 to 4, while the R loop is into the nested part. So now if we run that again, button populates, some rows, some columns, button display, and you'll notice it works like a charm. So this is a program that teaches us how to populate elements into the array, display, find the sum of the rows, find the sum of the columns, and output them. You can pause this video. I'm going to scroll quickly through it. You can pause at any point. That's our button populate once again. Randomly generates numbers in the array. We have our display, which is quite complex. We have the column headings, we have the row headings. We've concatenated. You can take that out. We've concatenated the elements or each row, and then we're displaying row at a time. This is to display the contents of the sum of the columns, and you'll notice our sum of the columns code, two nested loops. Sum is assigned sum plus the 2D array, and we are transferring the sum value into a 1D array. And that ends my program. Thank you.